He was the one who broke it!
The sound of shattered porcelain echoed through the East Hall like a gunshot. Every conversation died. Every visitor turned. The centerpiece of the museum's upcoming exhibition, a 400-year-old hand-painted ceremonial vase on temporary international loan, lay in glittering fragments across the marble floor. A pair of white gloves rested beside it. Mine. There. Clara Whitmore's voice cut through the silence before I could even breathe. I knew something was wrong when I couldn't find him. Security, don't let him leave. The guards were already moving. One grabbed my arm. Another stepped between me and the broken display. Visitors raised their phones. A child whispered, "Did he break it?" Someone answered before I could. The janitor did. The words spread faster than fire. The janitor destroyed it. I looked at the broken glass case. The lock hadn't been forced. The alarm hadn't sounded. None of that made sense. But nobody was looking at the case. They were looking at me. Marcus Hale. Night janitor. Gray uniform. Late 40s. Disposable. Marcus, Clara said softly, her voice carrying just enough disappointment to sound believable. If something happened, you should tell the truth. The museum director hurried over, face pale. What happened? Clara sighed dramatically. I walked in and found him standing here. She pointed at my gloves. They're covered in ceramic dust. The director stared at me. Marcus, I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't. Because there was nothing useful to say. The room had already chosen its story. 2 police officers entered through the main doors less than 5 minutes later. One asked quietly, "Sir, were you alone?" "Yes." "Did you touch the exhibit?" "Yes." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara lowered her eyes as though she couldn't bear hearing it. The younger officer immediately wrote something down. "You admit it?" "I touched the display. I didn't say I broke it." The older officer studied me carefully. "You aren't denying responsibility?" I met his eyes. "I'm saying exactly what happened. Nothing more. Nothing less." Clara almost smiled. Almost. That tiny movement told me everything. She believed she had already won. The museum's legal advisor rushed into the hall. "The lenders are demanding answers." The director rubbed his forehead. "This will destroy us." Clara stepped beside him. "We have to protect the museum's reputation." She looked directly at me. "We can't cover for negligence." Negligence. Interesting choice. Not sabotage. Not vandalism. She already knew which crime she wanted everyone to believe. One of the conservators knelt beside the fragments. That's strange. Nobody heard him. The crowd had become louder. Reporters had arrived. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. The director took a deep breath. "Marcus Hale, until the investigation concludes, you're suspended." I nodded once. No argument. No pleading. No anger. That surprised everyone more than if I had shouted. "You have nothing to say?" Clara asked. I looked at the shattered vase one final time. "No." Her eyebrows lifted. "No. I've already said what matters." She laughed quietly. "I don't think you understand the seriousness of this." I almost answered. Instead, I noticed something behind the display. One tiny black lens. Still blinking. Exactly where it should be. Good. Very good. I lowered my eyes before anyone followed my gaze. The older police officer noticed. "You seem remarkably calm." "I've cleaned worse messes." Several people scoffed. The officer kept watching me. As the guards escorted me through the lobby, whispers followed. He finally snapped. "I heard he drinks." They should sue him. What a disgrace. No one asked whether the evidence actually fit the accusation. People rarely do. Outside, rain had started falling. Cold. Steady. The museum doors closed behind me. For the first time all day, I smiled. Very slightly. Exactly as planned. 3 hours earlier. The museum had been silent except for the hum of climate control. I pushed my cleaning cart through East Hall while polishing bronze railings no visitor ever noticed. That was the point. People ignored janitors. Ignored cleaners. Ignored old men pushing buckets. Invisible people heard everything. Saw everything. Clara and assistant curator Daniel Foster hadn't realized I was behind the temporary exhibition wall when they entered. "You've delayed this too long," Daniel whispered. Clara folded her arms. The board will never promote me while that exhibition succeeds. They love Elias. They worship him. They'll make him executive curator. Daniel hesitated. Destroying the centerpiece is risky. It only has to look like an accident. What about insurance? I've already arranged the paperwork. And Marcus? Clara smiled. He works nights. He'll be blamed before sunrise. Silence. Then Daniel asked quietly, Are you sure? Clara answered without hesitation. People always believe the uniform. I closed my eyes. Not because I was hurt. Because she had confirmed every suspicion I'd had over the past month. Missing inventory records. Changed schedules. Security blind spots requested for maintenance. Tiny things. Too many tiny things. Enough to make me prepare. Enough to begin documenting everything. Enough to install one independent archival camera where museum policy allowed temporary monitoring during exhibit construction. Entirely legal. Entirely forgotten. Except by me. At 6 that evening, my apartment remained as quiet as the museum had not. Rain tapped against the windows while the television repeated the same headline every 20 minutes. Priceless artifact destroyed by museum employee. Different anchors. Same certainty. Same photograph. Mine. Not one of the broken display. Not one of the damaged lock. Mine. I muted the television. The silence felt honest. A knock came at my door. Not hurried. Measured. 3 even taps. I opened it to find Officer Nathan Reeves, the older policeman from the museum. He stood without his cap, rainwater dripping from his coat. I hope I'm not disturbing you. You already know the answer. A faint smile crossed his face. May I come in? I stepped aside. He looked around the apartment. Small. Neat. Bookshelves filled one wall. Art history. Conservation journals. Museum architecture. His eyes lingered on them. You read a lot for a janitor. I clean in a museum. He nodded slowly. Fair point. Neither of us sat immediately. Finally he asked, Why didn't you defend yourself? I answered every question. You barely answered any. I answered the important ones. Nathan folded his arms. I've worked investigations for 23 years. And people who panic usually have something to hide. I noticed. But innocent people usually panic too. They do. You didn't. I poured tea into 2 cups. He accepted one. You've already formed an opinion, I said. I have. And I don't think you broke that vase. I remained silent. He continued. The fracture pattern bothered one of your conservators. It bothered me too. It looked. He searched for the word. Prepared. I finally looked at him. Interesting. He leaned forward. So why stay quiet? Because the loudest lie often collapses under its own weight. Because innocent people ruin evidence trying to defend themselves. Because Clara believed she controlled the story. Because she didn't know every version of the story had already been recorded. Instead, I simply said, I've learned something after 30 years around museums. He waited. The truth ages better than panic. He studied me for a long moment. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed. What happened? He looked back at me. The museum just requested emergency forensic analysis. Why? They found microscopic scratches inside the display lock. I took a slow sip of tea. I see. Nathan narrowed his eyes. You expected that. No. You sound disappointed. I expected them sooner. He almost laughed. Almost. You really aren't worried. I've been worried for weeks. That answer confused him. He set his cup down. Marcus. He hesitated. Who are you? The question lingered between us. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. I walked to the bookshelf and removed an old leather notebook. Inside were dates, maintenance reports, photographs, shift schedules, copies of security requests, names, times, signatures, months of careful observations. I closed it again before handing it over. Not yet, I said. Nathan frowned. If you're innocent, this could clear you. It could. So why wait? Because this notebook isn't the strongest evidence. What is? I looked toward the rain-covered window. The person who believes she's already won. His phone rang again. He answered immediately. Yes. Silence. His expression hardened. What do you mean the backup server was erased? Another silence. They're certain. He slowly lowered the phone. The museum's internal surveillance files are gone. He looked straight at me. If those recordings are erased. They weren't the only recordings. His eyes widened. I said nothing else. Across town, Clara Whitmore was probably sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. She believed every digital trace had vanished. She believed every witness had already spoken. She believed the janitor had accepted defeat. She had overlooked one habit of mine. Every evening before leaving work, I always checked whether every temporary archival camera had completed its automatic cloud synchronization. Most employees never knew those units existed. Clara certainly hadn't. And tomorrow morning, during a closed emergency board meeting, she would discover that destroying a masterpiece had been far easier than destroying the truth. But I still had no intention of exposing her myself. Some collapses deserved an audience. Some lies only became unforgettable after the liar repeated them one time too many. Tomorrow, Clara would be given every opportunity to do exactly that. And I intended to remain silent, until silence became the loudest evidence in the room. At 9 the next morning, the museum's emergency board meeting began behind closed oak doors. I wasn't invited. That was expected. The invitation sitting on my kitchen table wasn't. It had arrived by courier 30 minutes earlier, sealed with the museum's crest. Attendance requested. Not required. Requested. The wording mattered. I folded the letter and slipped it into my coat pocket. By the time I reached the museum, satellite news vans lined the street. Visitors stood behind temporary barriers, pointing toward the entrance. The janitor's back. How can they let him inside? Maybe he's confessing. I walked past them without slowing down. The security guard who usually greeted me with a smile couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Marcus." "For what?" He hesitated. I believed them. I gave him a small nod. "You weren't the only one." Inside, the marble floors gleamed as if nothing had happened. Museums had a talent for hiding damage. People did too. A receptionist led me toward the executive conference room. The moment the doors opened, every conversation stopped. 8 board members. The museum director, Henry Collins. Legal counsel, Chief Conservator Elena Vargas. Officer Nathan Reeves. And Clara Whitmore. She looked immaculate in a navy suit, a picture of composed professionalism. Only the tightness in her jaw betrayed that she hadn't slept. Henry gestured toward an empty chair. "Marcus, thank you for coming." I was requested. "Yes." No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Henry cleared his throat. The forensic team completed an initial examination. Elena slid several photographs across the table. The display case wasn't opened by force. She pointed to microscopic images. Someone used an authorized access key. Daniel Foster's face turned pale. Clara remained still. Legal counsel spoke next. According to access logs, only 4 people entered East Hall after closing. He looked around the table. Myself, Ms. Whitmore, Mr. Foster, and Marcus Hale. Clara folded her hands. "There you have it." Nathan looked at her. "We're not finished." She smiled politely. "Of course." Henry rubbed his temples. The server containing surveillance footage was erased at 2:14 a.m. A murmur spread through the room. Elena frowned. "Who had administrator access?" Silence. Then the IT manager answered quietly. "Only 3 employees." Everyone slowly turned toward Clara. She didn't flinch. "I erased nothing." Nathan spoke evenly. "We're verifying that." She leaned forward. "Officer, surely you don't think I'd destroy evidence." Nathan didn't answer. She mistook silence for uncertainty. I recognized it for what it was. Patience. Henry finally looked at me. "Marcus." "Yes." "You've been unusually calm." "I don't enjoy panic." "Do you have anything you'd like to tell us?" Every eye settled on me, including Clara's. She wanted me to defend myself, to reveal my evidence, to expose my hand too early. Instead, I shook my head. "Not today." The room erupted. "Not today." Henry stared at me in disbelief. "You've been accused of destroying a national treasure." "I know. And you have nothing to say?" "I'll answer every question honestly." "Then answer this." Henry's voice hardened. "Did you destroy the vase?" "No." "Did you see who did?" "Yes." The room froze. Clara's fingers tightened around her pen. Nathan leaned forward. "You saw them?" "I did." Henry stood. "Who?" I met his eyes. "I'll answer when the investigation asks the right question." Clara laughed. "You expect us to believe that?" "No. I expect you to keep talking." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means people reveal themselves when they think they're winning." For the first time, irritation cracked her polished mask. "This isn't a philosophy lecture." "No. It's an investigation." She stood abruptly. "Then let's investigate." She pointed directly at me. "Search his apartment." Nathan calmly replied. Already completed. Her confidence faltered. And no evidence of theft. No hidden money. No signs of financial distress. Nothing. She recovered quickly. Then he must have acted out of resentment. Nathan asked quietly, against whom? She opened her mouth, then stopped, because she didn't have an answer. After the meeting, Henry asked me to remain. Everyone else filed out except Elena. She closed the conference room door. Henry sighed heavily. I owe you an apology. Not yet. He blinked. You still believe I might be guilty. He looked away. You don't know. No. Then don't apologize for uncertainty. Elena watched me carefully. Marcus, I've worked beside you for 11 years. You have. I don't believe you destroy history. I smiled faintly. Thank you. She hesitated. But I also don't understand you. That's fair. She walked to the window overlooking the central atrium. The staff is falling apart. Half accuse you. The other half accuse Clara. And Daniel resigned this morning. I looked at her. He resigned. She nodded. No explanation. Interesting. Too early. Someone was afraid. Daniel Foster wasn't at his apartment, nor at his office, nor answering his phone. By sunset, rumors spread through every department. He fled. He confessed. He was bribed. None of them were true. Nathan found him sitting alone in his parked car outside the city cemetery. He hadn't run. He simply hadn't known where else to go. Nathan called me afterward. He wants to talk. To me? Only to you. An hour later, I arrived. Daniel looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. Hands shaking around a paper coffee cup. I didn't think you'd come. You asked. I thought you'd hate me. I don't. He laughed bitterly. You should. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he whispered. I never touched the vase. I know. His head snapped up. You know? You were never the one making decisions. His shoulders slumped. Relief mixed with shame. I tried to stop her. I know. I told Clara it would ruin everything. I know. He stared at me. How? I didn't answer. Instead, I asked. What changed? His breathing became uneven. She wanted me to lie. And I lied. His voice cracked. But after the police came, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the sound. The vase breaking. He buried his face in his hands. I wasn't even there when she pushed it. Those words hung in the air. He realized what he'd admitted. Slowly, he looked up. You don't need to explain. I just confessed. No. You remembered. Tears filled his eyes. I never meant. I know. He laughed through the tears. Why aren't you angry? Because anger would make this about me. Truth had never needed my anger. It only needed time. Instead, I said, have you told Officer Reeves? No. Will you? His hands trembled. I'm afraid. Of Clara. He nodded. She knows people. She'll destroy my career. I looked toward the rows of quiet gravestones. Daniel. Yes. History remembers courage much longer than employment. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something inside him had settled. I'll testify. The next morning, before Daniel could reach the police station, news broke across every channel. Anonymous evidence clears janitor of direct sabotage. A still image from an unknown camera had been leaked. Not the full recording. Just one frame. Enough to show Clara entering East Hall after midnight. Enough to ignite questions. Not enough to prove guilt. The museum descended into chaos. Reporters crowded the entrance. Board members demanded answers. Employees whispered in every hallway. And Clara made her first irreversible mistake. In front of witnesses, she stormed into the IT office and shouted, "Who leaked that footage?" The room fell silent. One technician asked carefully, "What footage?" Clara froze. She had revealed knowledge she should never have possessed. No one had publicly announced that the leaked image came from surveillance. She had assumed it, because she already knew exactly where it came from. By the time Nathan arrived at the museum, 3 employees had independently reported Clara's outburst. He didn't smile. He simply opened a notebook. Sometimes guilt wasn't uncovered by evidence alone. Sometimes it introduced itself. Outside, rain began falling once more. Inside, Clara still believed she could regain control. She had no idea that the floor beneath her was already beginning to crack. The museum opened at 10. No one came for the art. They came for the scandal. Television crews occupied the front plaza. Every visitor seemed to carry a phone instead of a guidebook. Conversations stopped whenever an employee walked past. I resumed my work. Bucket. Mop. White gloves. Exactly as before. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A young volunteer hurried toward me, lowering her voice. Marcus, you don't have to clean today. I do. They're investigating. The floors are still dirty. She looked at me as though I were speaking another language. How can you act like everything's normal? I wrung out the mop. Because panic leaves stains harder to remove than mud. She fell silent. People often expected dramatic speeches from the accused. They rarely knew what to do with ordinary answers. At noon, Henry Collins found me polishing the bronze handrail outside the Renaissance Gallery. You've become impossible to understand. I've been told that. He sighed. The board voted this morning. I continued polishing. They've suspended Clara. That finally made me pause. Only suspended? For now. You disagree. I don't make board decisions. He studied my face. No. You simply wait for consequences. I looked at the reflection in the polished bronze. It isn't my job to punish anyone. His shoulders sagged. When did I become so blind? I thought about the years. Fundraising dinners. Award ceremonies. Endless meetings. The museum had grown larger every year. Success often narrowed a person's vision. You trusted results. I ignored character. His voice was almost a whisper. I promoted ambition because ambition looked like leadership. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Then he surprised me. Marcus, how long have you known? About Clara? Yes. I suspected her 6 weeks ago. His eyes widened. 6 weeks. Suspicion isn't proof. You could have reported her. I did. He frowned. I never received a report. You rejected it. His expression emptied. You called it paranoia. Memory struck him like a physical blow. The anonymous maintenance recommendation. The request for additional camera coverage. The warning about inconsistent access logs. He had signed each rejection personally. I remember. His voice cracked. I remember everyone. You were busy. No. He shook his head. I was arrogant. That admission seemed to cost him something. Real accountability always did. 2 floors above us, Clara sat alone inside her temporary administrative office. Suspended. Badge deactivated. Computer access revoked. She still had her phone, and she was making calls. Nathan obtained a warrant before sunset. Not because of Daniel's statement. Not because of the leaked image. Because Clara had contacted the same private data recovery company 3 times in 12 hours. She wasn't trying to prove her innocence. She was trying to find out what evidence still existed. When officers entered her office, she greeted them with practiced confidence. I've already spoken to legal counsel. Nathan nodded. I'm here for your work laptop. You already have the museum servers. We're asking for your laptop. It's my personal property. It was purchased by museum funds. Her smile faded. You have no right. Nathan calmly handed her the warrant. She read it once. Then again. Her fingers tightened around the paper. You think you'll find something? I think computers remember conversations better than people. She said nothing more. That evening, Elena knocked on my apartment door. She carried 2 paper bags from a nearby noodle shop. I wasn't sure whether you'd eaten. I hadn't. She entered without ceremony. We sat at the small kitchen table. Steam rose between us. For several minutes we simply ate. Finally she looked around my apartment. I expected more. More what? I don't know. She laughed softly. Resentment. There are no broken plates. No walls covered in newspaper headlines. No plans for revenge. I smiled. You sound disappointed. A little. She leaned back. I've spent the last week trying to understand you. And I still can't. Try asking a different question. She thought for a moment. Why stay? The question lingered. You could have resigned years ago. You've accepted lower pay than every conservator. You've cleaned floors while teaching interns who never knew your qualifications. Why? I looked toward the bookshelf. There was once a curator who told me something. What? Museums don't preserve objects. They preserve honesty. She frowned. I've heard that quote. I wrote it. Her chopsticks stopped halfway to her mouth. What? I stood and retrieved an old framed photograph from the shelf. It showed a much younger man standing beside the museum's foundation stone. Hair untouched by gray. Suit instead of uniform. Beside him stood architects and city officials. In the corner was my signature. Marcus Hale, founding curator. Elena stared at the photograph. Then at me. No. Her hands trembled as she took the frame. I've seen this photograph. I'm sure you have. It used to hang in the executive hallway. It did. The founding curator disappeared. I resigned. She looked up sharply. The records say you retired overseas. They were simplified. I don't understand. You weren't meant to. I poured fresh tea. The silence between us had changed. It no longer carried suspicion, only disbelief. I built this museum with 11 other people, I said quietly. We had almost no funding. We cleaned the galleries ourselves. We carried sculptures with borrowed trucks. We believed the museum belonged to the city, not to us. Elena listened without interrupting. When the board expanded, they wanted younger leadership. I agreed. You stepped down willingly? I believed institutions should outlive personalities. So why become a janitor? Because after I left the executive floor, I smiled faintly. People became honest around me. She slowly understood. They ignored you. Exactly. Executives perform. Employees perform. No one performs for the man holding a mop. She laughed despite herself. That's... She searched for the word. Brilliant. No. Useful. She placed the photograph back on the table. Does Henry know? No. The board? No. Clara? She never cared enough to ask. The realization saddened Elena more than it surprised her. She spent years chasing authority, without learning whose legacy she was standing in. I nodded once. The next morning, Nathan called before sunrise. We found something. His tone was different. Controlled. Almost careful. I'm listening. The forensic team recovered deleted emails. From Clara's laptop? Yes. He paused. They weren't addressed to Daniel. They were addressed to an overseas collector. I remained silent. The subject line read. Paper rustled. Insurance valuation after accidental loss. The words settled heavily between us. Nathan continued. The messages began 2 months before the exhibition. So it wasn't spontaneous. No. He exhaled slowly. It was planned from the beginning. Outside my window, dawn spread across the rooftops. People often believed greed appeared suddenly. In reality, it rehearsed itself. Again and again, until opportunity arrived. Nathan spoke again. The board wants an emergency public hearing. They're inviting donors, government officials, the press. They want transparency. I looked toward the museum visible in the distance. The grand exhibition. He understood immediately. The same stage she wanted. Yes, only a different performance. Across town, Clara sat in an interview room at the police headquarters. She had not been arrested. Not yet. She still believed she could negotiate. My lawyer is coming. Nathan placed a printed email on the table. She glanced at it. Only once. That was enough. The color drained from her face. She recovered quickly. These prove nothing. No. Nathan agreed. They prove planning. We're still looking for intent. She folded her arms. You'll never prove I touched the vase. Nathan closed the folder. We may not have to. For the first time since the investigation began, genuine fear entered Clara's eyes. She was beginning to realize the case had stopped revolving around one broken artifact. It had become a story about every lie told afterward, and lies multiplied far faster than truth, until they buried the person who created them. Meanwhile, I quietly prepared a small envelope for the museum board. Inside it rested one item, a brass access badge, worn smooth with age, the very first employee badge ever issued by the museum. No name, only one title engraved beneath the faded emblem. Founder. The grand exhibition was only 2 days away, and for the first time in years, the museum would finally remember who had built it. The morning of the grand exhibition arrived beneath a sky so clear it almost seemed cruel. 3 weeks earlier, the museum had expected this day to celebrate history. Instead, history had come to judge the museum. Black sedans lined the entrance. Donors stepped onto the red carpet beside government officials, international lenders, art critics, and journalists from every major network. Security was tighter than it had ever been. Inside, employees moved with rehearsed precision, but no amount of polished marble or fresh flowers could hide the tension. Every conversation ended with the same question. Will Clara speak? No one asked whether I would. No one expected the janitor to matter. That suited me perfectly. I wheeled my cleaning cart through the east corridor one last time before the ceremony. A young intern stopped me. Marcus. Yes. She hesitated. I wanted to apologize for believing the rumors. I looked at the nervous young woman. Did you? She nodded. I saw your gloves beside the vase. I never questioned anything. You don't owe me an apology. I do. No. She frowned. You owe yourself one. She blinked. When people stop asking questions, truth becomes lonely. She lowered her head. I'll remember that. I smiled. I hope you remember it longer than today. At 11 precisely, the auditorium filled. Henry Collins stood behind the podium, looking older than he had only a week earlier. Mistakes aged people faster than time. Ladies and gentlemen, he began. Today's exhibition was meant to honor preservation. He paused. Instead, it has reminded us that integrity must also be preserved. No applause followed. There shouldn't have been. Henry continued. Our investigation is nearing completion. We have chosen transparency over silence. Ironically, those words drew my attention more than anything else. Because silence had never been the enemy. Dishonesty had. Henry invited Officer Nathan Reeves onto the stage. Nathan wasn't a performer. He spoke plainly. The investigation has identified deliberate evidence tampering. A ripple spread through the audience. We have recovered deleted communications. We have confirmed unauthorized access attempts. And we have verified inconsistencies in witness testimony. Still no names. Still no accusations. Nathan was patient. He understood timing. A prosecutor only asked questions whose answers already existed. Behind the curtain, Clara paced like a trapped animal. Her lawyer whispered urgently, "You don't have to answer every question." She shook her head. "They're bluffing. We don't know that. They don't have the recording." Her lawyer stopped. "Recording?" Clara froze. She realized too late what she had said. "You never mentioned a recording." He stared at her. "What recording?" She looked away. "Nothing." For the first time, even her own lawyer looked uncertain. Henry returned to the microphone. "There is one final matter." He unfolded a letter. This morning the museum board received an anonymous package. He opened the envelope. Inside lay the old brass badge. The room fell silent. Henry frowned. His hands trembled. He recognized it immediately. "I." His voice almost disappeared. "This cannot be." He looked toward the audience. "Would Marcus Hale please join us?" Hundreds of heads turned. Whispers spread like wind through dry leaves. "The janitor? Why?" I left the side aisle and walked calmly toward the stage. The same uniform. The same gray gloves. The same quiet steps. Henry held the badge in both hands. "Where did you get this?" "It belonged to me." Silence. Someone laughed nervously. Henry stared into my face as if seeing me for the first time. "No." His eyes searched my features. The older photographs. The foundation portraits. The years hidden beneath gray hair and simple clothing. His breathing caught. "Oh my God." He stepped back. "You?" I nodded once. "Yes." His voice broke. "You're Marcus Hale." "I am. The Marcus Hale. I've always been." Gasps swept across the auditorium. Journalists raised their cameras. Flash after flash illuminated the room. Henry swallowed hard. "The founding curator. Never left." "I did." I answered gently. "I simply changed offices." Laughter didn't come. Only stunned silence. Henry stepped away from the podium. Without a word, he offered it to me. I didn't take it. Instead, I remained beside it. "The podium belongs to the museum," I said quietly. "Not to me." The audience leaned forward. Every lens focused on the old janitor. Every expectation waited for outrage, for accusation, for revenge. They would receive none of them. I looked toward Clara. She stood near the side entrance, her confidence finally gone. She refused to meet my eyes. "I have cleaned these floors for 11 years, I began. Many people asked me why. I never answered. Today I will." The auditorium became completely silent. When people know your title, they clean their words before they speak. They perform. They flatter. They hide. But when they think you're invisible, they reveal themselves. I let the words settle. I did not become a janitor because I loved mops. A few nervous smiles appeared. I became one because museums are built on honesty. And honesty speaks most clearly around those it believes unimportant. Henry slowly lowered his head. Several board members could no longer meet my eyes. I warned this institution. More than once. I requested additional monitoring. I reported irregularities. I asked simple questions. My reports were ignored. Not because of malice. Because of assumptions. No bitterness entered my voice. Only fact. That failure belongs to all of us. Henry whispered. "It belongs to me." I looked at him. "It belongs to leadership." He nodded once. "I accept that." Nathan stepped forward carrying a sealed evidence case. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now authorized to present the recovered archival recording. A giant screen descended from the ceiling. The lights dimmed. The footage began. A timestamp appeared. 11:47 p.m. East Hall. The priceless vase rested untouched inside its display. Minutes later, Clara entered alone. She looked carefully in both directions. She unlocked the display, removed the vase, placed it near the edge of the pedestal, then deliberately shoved it onto the marble floor. The sound echoed through the auditorium exactly as it had that night. Several people gasped. One donor covered her mouth. The recording continued. Clara calmly scattered ceramic fragments. She removed a pair of white gloves from a maintenance cart. Mine. She placed them beside the broken pieces. Then she walked away. No dramatic music. No editing. Only truth. The screen went black. Silence lasted nearly 20 seconds. It felt longer. Nathan finally spoke. This recording was recovered from an independent archival camera installed under museum preservation policy. He looked toward me. It remained untouched because almost no one remembered it existed. A reporter stood. Mr. Hale, were you waiting to release this? Yes. Why? Because evidence speaks more clearly after lies become complete. Another reporter called out. Weren't you angry? I was disappointed. Why not expose her immediately? I answered without hesitation. Because had I interrupted every lie, people would have believed the argument instead of the evidence. Nathan walked toward Clara. She didn't resist. She didn't argue. She simply stared at the floor where the image of the shattered vase had appeared moments before. As handcuffs closed around her wrists, she whispered so quietly that only those nearest heard. I thought, no one would ever notice me. I looked at her calmly. I did. You just never noticed me. She closed her eyes. Years of ambition. Months of planning. Days of deception. They ended not with my revenge, but with her own choices. As officers led her through the auditorium, no one applauded. Justice did not need applause. It only needed witnesses. Henry turned toward the audience. His voice was steady despite the emotion in it. Today, the museum recovered something far more valuable than a single artifact. It recovered its integrity. For the first time since the vase had shattered, I believe that statement might actually be true. The reporters waited outside my apartment before sunrise. Microphones, camera crews, satellite vans. The same faces that had declared me guilty now wanted an exclusive interview. One reporter hurried toward me the moment I stepped onto the sidewalk. Mr. Hale, how does it feel to be vindicated? I adjusted the strap on my worn canvas bag. I wasn't looking for vindication. You spent 11 years working as a janitor. Did you secretly plan this reveal? No. Were you testing everyone? I was observing. Isn't that the same thing? No. Testing assumes you're trying to make someone fail. Observing allows people to choose who they already are. The young reporter lowered his microphone for a moment. He hadn't expected that answer. Another shouted from behind him. Will you return as executive director? I haven't been offered the position. But if you are, I smiled politely. Then I'll think carefully before answering. I walked away before another question could follow. For once, leaving a conversation didn't feel like retreat. It felt like freedom. The museum remained closed for 1 week. Not because of structural damage, because trust also needed restoration. Employees gathered in the central atrium on Monday morning. No press, no donors, only the people who had built their lives inside those walls. Henry stood before them. His resignation letter rested on the podium. I failed this institution. No one interrupted. I ignored warnings. I valued appearances over character. I accepted responsibility before the board. My resignation has been approved. Several employees quietly wiped away tears. Henry wasn't a villain. He had simply mistaken confidence for wisdom. That mistake had nearly destroyed everything. He looked toward me. The museum owes you more than an apology. I shook my head. It owes the public honesty. He smiled sadly. You still refuse to make this personal. It never was. The board elected an interim director. To everyone's surprise, it wasn't me. It was Elena Vargas. She nearly refused. I belong in conservation. One board member answered. Exactly. For the first time in years, the room laughed. It was a small sound, but it carried hope. After the meeting, Elena found me standing alone inside the restored East Hall. The broken vase had returned, not as porcelain, but as carefully reconstructed fragments mounted inside a transparent display. A bronze plaque beneath it read, "Integrity is also worth preserving." Elena stood beside me. "I wanted your opinion. It's honest. I was afraid people would think displaying it was embarrassing." "It should be." She looked at me. "Embarrassing? Institutions that hide mistakes repeat them." She nodded slowly. "Then we'll leave it exactly where it is." Later that afternoon, Daniel Foster arrived carrying a cardboard box. His office had already been emptied. I wanted to return these. Inside were notebooks, exhibition drafts, catalogs, years of work. He looked exhausted. I accepted a plea agreement. I heard, "I'll lose my curator's license." Probably. I deserve that. Silence settled between us. Finally he asked, "Do you hate me now?" "No. You should." "I don't." His eyes reddened. I helped her. You also stopped helping her. Too late. Late isn't the same as never. He stared at the reconstructed vase. "I keep wishing I could undo everything." "You can't." "I know. So what do I do?" I picked up one of the exhibition catalogs. "Learn why you stayed silent when it mattered." His shoulders stiffened. "Not why Clara lied. Why you accepted it." He lowered his head. "I was afraid." "I know. Fear explained your choice. It didn't excuse it." He slowly nodded. For the first time since we'd met in the cemetery, I saw something steadier in his eyes. Not relief. Responsibility. It was a better beginning than forgiveness. A month later, the museum reopened. No grand ceremony. No celebrities. Just open doors. Families wandered through the galleries once again. Children pointed at paintings with the same uncomplicated wonder they always had. The building finally sounded like a museum instead of a courtroom. I resumed my morning walk through the galleries. Not with a mop. With a notebook. Volunteers occasionally stopped me to ask questions about a sculpture or an old manuscript. I answered when I could. When I couldn't, I admitted it. Curiosity had always been more valuable than certainty. Elena found me in the Asian art wing. The board made another decision. They usually do. She laughed. They voted unanimously. For what? They want you to become senior historical advisor. No executive office. No management meetings. No fundraising dinners. Only preservation. I looked around the quiet gallery. Sunlight filtered gently through the high windows. A child stood before an ancient bronze mirror, fascinated by the distorted reflection. What would the position involve? Teaching. Reviewing acquisitions. Mentoring young curators. No bureaucracy. I smiled. They've finally learned. So, she folded her arms. Will you accept? I considered the question carefully. Then I nodded. Yes. Not because of the title. Because of the work. The museum introduced a new training program for every employee. Not about security systems. Not about insurance. About ethics. Every new staff member visited the reconstructed vase before receiving an identification badge. They learned its story. Not the names. The lesson. A single sentence appeared on the final slide of every orientation. People reveal their character most clearly when they believe no one important is watching. No one knew I had written it years earlier. I preferred it that way. One rainy evening, the same young volunteer who had apologized to me weeks before knocked on my office door. I need advice. Come in. She sat nervously. I've been offered a promotion. Congratulations. I don't know if I'm ready. What makes you think readiness comes first? She frowned. I thought it did. I shook my head. Character comes first. Skill follows. She smiled. I think I understand. Good. She stood to leave, then paused. Mr. Hale? Yes. Were you ever lonely? The question lingered. I answered honestly. Sometimes. Was it worth it? I looked through the office window toward visitors quietly exploring the galleries. Parents explaining paintings to children. Students sketching sculptures. An elderly couple holding hands beneath a stained glass ceiling. Yes. Because I never lost the reason I came here. She smiled before quietly closing the door behind her. The museum no longer needed a hidden guardian. It needed honest people willing to be seen. And, at last, it had begun to find them. Winter arrived quietly. Snow gathered along the museum steps before dawn, softening the edges of the old stone building. For the first time in years, I entered through the front entrance instead of the staff door. The security guard smiled. Good morning, Mr. Hale. No hesitation. No pity. Just respect. Good morning. He handed me a visitor's badge out of habit, then laughed. I suppose you don't need one. I've worn enough badges for one lifetime. He grinned. Fair enough. Inside, children hurried past me toward the natural history wing, their teachers struggling to keep them in orderly lines. The museum felt alive again. Not because it had forgotten what happened, because it had remembered why it existed. My office overlooked the central atrium. It was modest. A desk, several overflowing bookshelves, 2 chairs, 1 kettle that never seemed to stop boiling. The polished executive office on the top floor had been offered to me twice. I had declined it twice. Elena never argued. She understood. Leadership wasn't measured by the size of a window. Near noon, Nathan Reeves arrived carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. I figured you'd still forget lunch. I usually do. He handed me one. I have news. I suspected as much. He sat down. Clara accepted a plea agreement. I remained silent. She'll serve prison time. She also lost every professional certification. He looked at me carefully. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. He nodded. She requested one thing. I looked up. She wants to speak with you. The room became quiet. Outside, a group of schoolchildren laughed somewhere in the atrium below. Nathan waited. You don't have to. I know. She insisted. What did she say? He opened a small notebook. There are things only he deserves to hear. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, when? Tomorrow. The correctional facility stood at the edge of the city. Gray walls, steel gates. Everything inside seemed designed to erase individuality. A guard led me into a small visitation room. Clara entered a minute later. Without tailored suits, without expensive jewelry, without carefully rehearsed confidence. She looked strangely ordinary. She sat across from me. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, she laughed quietly. I used to hate silence. I noticed. You were always so calm. I wasn't. She looked surprised. I simply chose not to display everything I felt. She nodded slowly. I've had months to think. I'm sure. I kept asking myself one question. What question? She met my eyes for the first time. Why didn't you destroy me? The answer came easily. Because you already were. She closed her eyes. A tear escaped despite her effort to stop it. I wanted you to scream. I know. I wanted you to call me a monster. I know. I wanted something that would make me feel justified. I said nothing. She smiled bitterly. You never gave me that. No. Why? Because justice isn't built from hatred. The room fell silent again. This time, she didn't seem afraid of it. Clara reached into the small envelope the guard had allowed her to bring. She slid a folded sheet of paper across the table. I wrote this. I looked at it, but didn't open it. What is it? My confession. The complete one. I lied to the police. I lied to the board. I lied to myself. She lowered her gaze. There are names in it. People I manipulated. People who helped me. People I blamed. I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted the truth to exist somewhere. I rested my hand on the paper. You should give this to the prosecutor. I already did. Then why bring another copy? So that the man I tried to erase wouldn't know. Her voice faltered. That I finally stopped lying. I studied her face. For the first time, I believed she meant it. Regret could not undo the shattered vase. It could not restore lost trust. But it could prevent one final lie. I stood. So this is goodbye. She nodded. I suppose it is. As I reached the door, she spoke one last time. Marcus. I turned. You once said museums preserve honesty. Yes. I understand that now. I inclined my head. I'm glad. The guard opened the door. Neither of us looked back. Spring arrived several months later. Cherry trees bloomed in the museum courtyard. Visitors filled the galleries once more. The reconstructed vase had become one of the museum's most discussed exhibits. Not because it was the most beautiful object in the building. Because its cracks remained visible. A small child stood before it holding his father's hand. Why didn't they fix it all the way? His father smiled. Because some things shouldn't pretend they were never broken. The boy nodded thoughtfully. I like it better this way. So do I said quietly as I walked past. That evening, the staff gathered in the atrium after closing. No speeches had been planned. No cameras were present. Just colleagues sharing tea beneath the museum's glass ceiling. Elena raised her cup. To everyone who chose truth. The others echoed the toast. I looked around the room. The young volunteer who had once doubted me was now leading educational tours. Daniel, after serving his sentence and rebuilding his life, had begun restoring damaged community archives under supervision, far from prestigious museums, but close to the purpose he had nearly forgotten. Henry visited occasionally as an ordinary member, quietly donating books instead of opinions. No one occupied the room because of status, only because they cared. As the lights dimmed, I walked once more through the East Hall. The marble floor reflected the soft evening glow. There was no trace of shattered porcelain. Only visitors. Only history. Only quiet. I paused before the reconstructed vase. Its plaque had gained one additional line beneath the original inscription. Integrity is also worth preserving. Truth does not need to shout to be heard. I smiled, then continued walking. There were still galleries to protect, still stories to preserve. And now, finally, I no longer had to do either of them alone.